Good morning. So, I was doing a little bit of research. Well, I wasn't doing research, but last night, before I went to bed, I asked ChatGPT a question for exploration. And I asked, and let me explain, like, my relationship with AI is none other than to get baseline public knowledge to know what to anticipate is is credible, things to say that are credible. So, like, if I'm going to say something that contradicts AI, meaning that I am contradicting the sources trusted by who groomed the source pool for information on the internet that the AI like ChatGPT uses, right? Then I know where I'm taking my conversation from. It's just like, okay, this is X, Y, and Z things that are of the assumed known public record. And then I asked ChatGPT are the descendants. Well, actually, there are two questions I asked. The first question before that was, is Flavius Josephus considered to be accurately describing the character of the Jewish people in the Jewish War? And with the exception of where they could, where ChatGPT, where it says that he has the same kind of like biases that you've heard. So when people talk about, oh, here's Josephus's point of yada yada yada, like, everything not only reflected that, it also reflected my impression of reading this translation that you have been catching me read. Got it? So, as far as characterization of the Jews is concerned, and no other particular facts like, historical things like everything we've seen in the annotations where numbers are getting exaggerated and years are off, allegedly. Although they may not be off at all, if the calendar dating system was improperly transferred, right? And I'm not the kind of person that makes Tartarian allegations about 1,000 years was added to our calendar as filler to set us apart from our own history. I am not saying that. I am saying that probably about 1,000 years of history was censored from the point of view of the elites, right? Meaning that, like, we'll tell the story of the peasants. We won't let them know that the kings in their castles had airships. That kind of thing, right? And all the people's superstition was coming from kings and castles with super technology fucking with the plebs. Or something of that nature, right? I'm not going to make any particular claims, allegations therein. So, the second question, which is a little bit more interesting, is that I asked who were who are the descendants of the surviving groups of the Zealots and the what's the name? The Sakara? or the Saqqari or whatever. And so now, according to ChatGPT, which may or may not pan out, I had to go to bed, so I didn't follow up on this inquiry. But the answer that it gave me is that no, pretty much all of them were killed or sold into slavery. And I would say they're implying that they got sold into slavery and then, you know, and then nothing remarkable came of any children since then, or something to that effect, right? Because we kind of understand, you know, a thing or two about, you know, slavery. You know, if you're a slave by certain circumstances, not all slaves are treated exactly the same, right? You know, because you came from somewhere, right? And then once you're a slave, it's like being a prisoner, and the whole world treats you the way prison guards treat you. Yeah, you ain't fucking special. You're a slave, just like in our society. If you're a prisoner, and we still agree by which the laws that you find yourself of prison, that we identify you as a criminal, as a prisoner, so on and so forth. You're treated that way. You are a criminal, and thus of the status of the title prisoner in our society until the judges that we have appointed in trust have had the declaration of your term of engagement in prison as a criminal, it comes to an end, right? However, all the way up to the founding of this current state of Israel, right? 1947, right? It would fucking seem that among, like, these Zionists, the Zionist nationalist, actually memorializes and are inspired by these characters, as have been allegedly accurately described in character by Josephus, who you've been hearing me read all about, right? And whom, as I have said, look at how history repeats itself. Now, I don't believe that the state of Israel is in control. I think that the state of Israel is straight up in the same situation that it's been. And that this isn't about the state of Israel, but it is about the Zionist ideologies that would call themselves Jews. I do believe that it is about them, as they are spread across the world since antiquity, since before history. And that those powers, they want to pin the entire empire, aka the global world. Those those who are in agreement to the international laws and norms and acknowledgments of the United Nations and other global affiliates, who are the ones that created the State of Israel, right? The State of Israel is a UN creation. It's one of the only nations that was ever created by basically other forces in the world. Okay? You know, no other people, which is part of what makes the Palestinians so upset, is that the Palestinians, at a certain point, well, they wanted to get the Israel treatment. Well, what about us now? You know, especially because the way Israelis treated them made it fucking necessary. Right? This is like, you know, the late phase of the Native Americans, trying to hash things out for themselves before they got completely closed in on a reservation, right? But it's too late, you know. It's just like at that point you're just appealing to humanity, and a few other things. But like, you know, you're not a force on your own anymore. You're a force by the grace of the superiors, of the conquerors, right? And so this is also part and parcel of why I can't be against the whole manner in which ICE does what it does, right? As the answer to the failures of what is the Border Patrol and their deal with keeping them in, or keeping them out, excuse me. All this shit. So, we have had this impression upon us, right? Coming from specifically Jews of an immoral type who are lumped in equivocally with the Jews as a whole, as per the way persons who have a Zionist filter of the events of the Bible see it. You understand, right? And there's built in, baked into the cake, an anti-Semitic trap in dealing with all of this because of the gaslighting of the Loxism that is part of the core ideologies on a human level of Zionism. And that's why I wanted to read The Jewish War, because I knew from people who were talking about the book that important facts about this period in time matter. That there was enough accuracy to be noted in this matter. So the Jews and the Sicarii are both honored in this system, right? This Israel, and this is why I have no respect for people that are. Yeah, I really actually don't have respect for people that are anti-Israel. Like, my attitude has been like, let them blow themselves up. That's my attitude. I don't care. I really don't care, because your Palestinian immigration problem is not got anything to do with how much you ought to be favoring Palestine's mortal enemy, right? I think that that ought to be also understood by my friends in network, because guys I know, Thomas Sheridan, right, is pro-Israel, right, and you know, this is coming from the fact that yes, that this society, because it is got liberal in it, right? Like, I mean, the Jews, they got liberal types, they got conservative types and stuff like that, right? And it is on par with pagan attitudes in a certain respect, right? But the trap is to get you for or against it one way or the other, right? Natural law did not bring Israel about, right? It was a long, manipulative campaign of sympathy, using reverse racism, of being like, you know, that kindly Jew, you know, all Jews are kindly like that. All Jews are quite good people. And, you know, I mean, like, once in a while you got ones that fall astray, and, you know, there's going to be crime and punishment like any other nation, and yada yada yada. And it's just like, we don't ask ourselves, like, what is it in the character of a people that makes them capable of holding a nation for their own, right? So, under the assumption that Josephus has accurately characterized the Jews in the Jewish War, you can see that Herod was the last, unifying force in the Roman experiment of an Israeli nation colony, right? It was kind of like a nation colony pseudo-state under Rome protectorate that was Rome invented for them. All right? Like, they're brown-nosing, right? They're brown-nosing, and, you know, guys like Josephus are getting in there, right? Are part of the apparatus, right? Even if they're not a senator or something, you know, they're part of the ranks of civilization and society. You know, they are writing, they are orating, they are, you know, holding various offices. They are trusted friends of people's. You know, they are appointed by the Caesar for this and that. These Romanized Jews, right? Because they didn't want to be in certain circumstances. They didn't want to be in certain circumstances, all so they could uphold their traditions, right? And, you know, they had their temple back then, too. Hey, how's it going? It's Kelly. Good to see you, Kelly. Um, So my point is that Israel's not the one in charge here, right? So it is, so it is incorrect to actually blame the state of Israel. The state of Israel is the benefactor of the shadow global influence of Zionist power players operating all over the world. Maybe less prevalent in the Far East. Maybe even less prevalent in swaths of Africa, right? Especially because they can play a whole game with you. This rain, I hope this rain isn't like drowning out my voice. Please let me know if the rain is drowning me out. But where was I? Anyway, yeah, because you see in modern day that when a Jewish person is part of different ethnic nations, wow, the thing's coming down, Captain. I can hardly hear myself think. Let me see here. Wow. I don't know if that's going to be any better for anybody. Alright, I'm just going to keep this up and see how it goes. This is annoying. But anyway, people will confuse them with their own race, right? Most of the Americans of that liberal nature, well, that's better, good. Most Americans of that liberal nature are blaming all these white people. It's because, like, the Jew brings up the Jew when it's that they're Jewish when the context of the situation is friendly, right? You know, so when they're having the, and when they're having the racial argument, they got that sympathy card, but they'll never say that that a atrocity that was that had Jewish involvement, like George Soros, being a little skeever, by being a Nazi sympathizer, thus and being spared by the Nazis to be an informant and taking his fellow Jews and getting them deported, right? All sorts of shit like this. So you've got what happened in Germany, which was a lot of Jews in Germany, and then you kind of don't see it per se because you're looking at the Jews and you're not realizing to yourself, because you've been taught that only these kinds of people are Jews, that there are other kinds of people who are Jews, right? Not every Jew is either a Hasidic dude or just a dude with who's in movies and comedy, and he's, and he's got that snarky attitude, right? It's none of that's it's not all just those two, right? Senator Blumenthal here in Connecticut, right? He's Jewish. And a lot of people, I think, would look at him, because complexion is what complexion is that, like, okay, he's Jewish, but he's white, like us, right? I mean, you can treat him that way, but that's not how he treats himself. Any Jew knows that they've got the persecution of their ancestors as a card they can play, right? And they don't want the Carpathian white man to know the same thing. I mean, you can't really hide it, because slavery comes from Slav, and so that's kind of on the nose. But if you're not a Slavic person, you don't have a claim to slavery that everybody knows, right? And so, like, a Slav could do that, like some Russian being harassed, about a thing. Granted, what the only thing Russians are being harassed about is their harassing of the Ukrainians, and that's Slav on Slav crime, right? So, excuse me. But the point is that between both of them, right? They are the original slaves by name slave in that respect. I think they had different words for slave in classical Greek times and Latin. I don't think they used that word as a root. I think. Because I have to double check things on what Russian or original history is, because this is the thing about the conflict in the Ukraine, is that, well, for one thing, it involves the former Khazarians, and probably the former Khazarians are, there may be other Jews other than the Khazarians that also were up there, but the Khazarians were the predominant ones that got the empire or whatever going, right? Because these were Turkic people, right? But these Turkic people, they probably came out of what happened with the dissolution of Israel, right? Because the collapse of the empire would have took any Jews that were not involved with the riots, especially so fucking heavily devastated, right? There's a migrational pattern to be taken a look at from this point forward, from where these groups of the free or slaved would end up across the empire. And then when the empire breaks down, what they make of themselves in that respect, and thus the Khazarians and such, right? And so they move up into the Caucasus Mountains to define the Caucasoid person, right? But this area, well before the Khazarians got there, I believe it was before the Khazarians got there, it was the Slavs. Now, when we have these historically framed conversations, that can be mistaken, especially if you're kind of like a chatty trad West guy. Look little bit like my attitudes. A little bit. You would assume that by looking at this history, you're trying to get back to who was the guy who was originally attacked, and it's just like, the only reason why that would truly matter, if I was making that framework of the historical argument, is to say, who am I supportive of? Who do I spiritually support in their endeavor? Do I spiritually back the Ukrainian national or the Russian national? I just want to, I don't want to get involved because regardless of how many claims the left can make that the Kremlin authority is illegitimate because he's a brutal dude, and thus we don't have to be in a peaceful, harmonious trading posture with the Russians, with the exception of where we already are, because we do have Russian imports. We do have Russians in America. I met a very lovely one. Or everything that we know about the deal with the Ukraine, and especially because we're looking at the framework of the Jewish influence and everything else, and this conversation about why the Jewish factor in Ukraine matters. It takes a long time to be done properly, right? To make the point that you're not trying to trick the world into eugenics and genocide, right? You're not trying to, because I think back then we had a terrible sense of who was what in that regards, right? And we're having a hard time because, the Jews are so unaware of their own distorted history, and they don't think that they need to explain where they're, the deal with their tradition versus another, and then someone could be very, depending on where they are at in their study of the Revelations, they might be in a phase of anti-Semitic attitude because they're still learning a few things, and they're going through the being mad about it, right? Because they are seeing the consequences of lives being lived, and then there's a little bit of accidental projection onto personal individuals and personal families that comes of this, right? That attitude, that sentiment, I think that there was this kind of knowledge that had exploded in Germany while the Germans were going through their folkish movement, getting their tradition straight, seeing how Jewish influence had changed them from a way of life they would have liked to have had better, right? Because of all the problems of Christianity and our perceived relationship with the Jews as per what Christians wanted, so on and so forth, right? And then all of that got hijacked because of the circumstances of exploitation by the Allied powers, particularly the French, against the Germans. What's really interesting is that we have this reputation about being afraid of the power of the German. Well, I mean, the Germanic people as a whole, sure, because the French used to have a hard fucking core reputation, man. Like Napoleon accomplished a great number of things, had a very Alexander the Great aura to his manner of conquest, right? I think the Napoleonic times had a lot to do with our perspective of Tartaria. I really believe that. I think that it had a tremendous amount to do with it. I think that the reason why we see things like the Chicago's World Fair situation and stuff is coming from perhaps French Freemasons on commission by Napoleon on behalf of his nation to build all these neoclassical structures for the Louisiana Territory that, he had all these high designs for, right? This may have been part and parcel of the nature of the Louisiana Purchase, right? Because we're forgetting that we don't talk about our colonial history outside of just the 13 colonies' extended relationships, and then we make mention of, well, the Spaniards were down here and doing these kinds of things, and the French were over here doing these kind of things, and the Brits were up there, Canada, doing all those kinds of things, and we left it at that. And made sure that you didn't even think there was a tremendous mystery there. And now everybody is seeing that there's kind of more of a mystery. And the Tartaria, not Tartaria so much, but just this Antiquitech narrative has teeth. So anyway, there will be more threads along these lines to pull from, right? Because the Zealots and the Sicarii, if we're basically seeing these kinds of groups have returned, then what we basically need to do is we need to take a look and double check again who were the forces that fueled their culture, that made them what they are in freedom, right? Because I think that we're probably leaving that we're looking at things in a general kind of cultural sense, but we're pretending like there's no names that take responsibilities within their culture, like whoever the artists were, whoever certain priests were. It's always about the priests in reality, right? Especially because they're still kind of third world countrying everything, and so they don't really have much in the way of the arts. They're mostly entertaining themselves with like, just sexual pleasures and drugs and shit, right? And feasting upon the finer things until all of that ran the fuck out. So anyway, there will be more to explore with all of those threads, and we'll see how things go once I finally get to the end of the book. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time right now while I am getting myself acclimated to this particular work schedule for the next week to get it done on a work night. So we'll see what happens come Friday or Saturday, because I don't think I can give you something today. All right, I will catch you guys later.